Malachi Briggs learned to run before he learned to read. He did not remember his first memory clearly, only pieces of it, like broken glass inside his head. Heat, dust, a woman screaming somewhere far away, and the sound of a whip cutting air before it cut flesh. Even as a child, his body understood something his mind could not yet name. When the sound came, you moved. When the men shouted, you did not hesitate. When the ground burned your feet, you kept going. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from, and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. The Briggs plantation lay in eastern Texas, a wide, ugly stretch of cotton fields pressed between swamps and pine woods. The White House sat on a small rise like it was afraid of touching the same earth as everyone else. The slave quarters were long, low, and always smelled of sweat, smoke, and sickness. Malachi had been born in one of those rooms, on a night his mother never spoke about and no one celebrated. His mother, Ruth, worked in the fields until her back bent into a shape that never fully straightened again. She spoke little, but when she did, she spoke carefully, as if every word cost something. The only thing she ever told him about his father was that he had been sold south when Malachi was still small enough to be carried on one arm. "Don't build pictures of people who can disappear," she once said. "Pictures hurt more when they break." Malachi was tall for his age, even as a boy, with long arms and a quiet way of moving. The overseer, a red-faced man named Harlan Webb, noticed that early. Webb liked quiet ones. He said they were either easy to break or dangerous, and he enjoyed finding out which. By the time Malachi was 14, he was working full days in the field. By 15, he was being sent on errands between the main house and the outer sheds. That was how he learned the layout of the land better than most. He knew where the ground went soft near the swamp's edge, where the pine trees grew close enough together to hide a man, and where the old animal trails cut through the brush like forgotten roads. He also learned how sound carried, how a shout could bounce, how dogs' voices changed when they were on a real trail. On the day everything broke, the heat sat heavy and unmoving, like the air itself had decided to stop breathing. The cicadas were so loud they made his head hurt. Malachi was carrying a sack of tools toward one of the storage sheds near the tree line when he heard shouting from behind the quarters. At first, he tried to keep walking. That was the rule. Don't look. Don't listen. Don't let yourself be pulled into something that would swallow you whole. But the shouting was not the usual kind. It had an edge to it, fear in it. Anger too, but not the simple, lazy anger of men who owned other men. This was sharper. He slowed, then stopped. He told himself he was only resting his arms. The sack was heavy. His shoulders hurt. Another scream cut through the air. He turned. They had gathered near the whipping post. Not the whole plantation, just enough people to make it feel like a crowd. A few field hands, 2 overseers, and Mr. Briggs himself, standing with his hat in his hand, dabbing sweat from his face as if this were an inconvenience. In the center, tied to the post, was a girl. Malachi knew her. Her name was Eliza. She worked in the house sometimes. She laughed easily, which always seemed like a dangerous thing to do. She could not have been more than 16. Her dress was torn. One sleeve hung loose. There was blood on her mouth. Webb was talking, but Malachi couldn't hear the words at first. His ears were full of his own heartbeat. Then he heard Mr. Briggs say calmly, "Make an example." Webb smiled. Malachi did not remember stepping closer, but suddenly he was near enough to see Eliza's hands shaking where they were tied. Her eyes met his for a brief, terrible second. There was a look in them he never forgot. Not fear. Not exactly. It was understanding. The whip came down. Once, twice, Eliza screamed. Someone in the crowd looked away. Someone else laughed nervously. By the third strike, Malachi realized what they were doing was not punishment. It was erasing her. Something in him shifted then. Not like a single thought, but like a wall inside him cracked. When it was over, they cut her down. She did not move. Mr. Briggs put his hat back on and said, "Get back to work." The crowd slowly broke apart like smoke. Malachi did not remember how he finished his tasks that day. He did not remember eating. He did not remember sleeping. He only remembered the way Eliza's eyes had looked at him, and the way the world had continued as if nothing had happened. 2 nights later, Webb came to the quarters drunk. That alone was not unusual. He walked through the narrow space between the sleeping pallets, kicking at feet, laughing to himself. Malachi lay still, eyes open, watching the shadows move. Webb stopped near Ruth. "Your boy's getting big," he said, "too big to be useless." Ruth did not answer. Webb leaned down, close enough that Malachi could smell the liquor on his breath. "Maybe I'll take him with me tomorrow. Show him how things work." Malachi felt his mother's hand tighten around his wrist in the dark. Something in his chest went very cold. The next day, Malachi was sent to carry water to one of the far fields. Webb followed him. They walked in silence for a while, the cicadas screaming overhead. Then Webb said, "You ever think about running?" Malachi did not answer. Webb chuckled. "Don't. They always catch you. And when they do—" He let the sentence hang. They reached a narrow path that cut toward the trees. Webb gestured with his chin. "Go on." Malachi stepped onto the path. A few yards in, Webb said, "Stop." Malachi stopped. Webb's hand rested on the handle of his knife. "You know," Webb said, "sometimes a man just gets tired of looking at the same faces." He stepped closer. Malachi understood then. Not with words. With his body. He moved before he had time to think. He swung the heavy water container as hard as he could. It caught Webb on the side of the head. The sound it made was dull and wrong. Webb went down. For a moment, Malachi just stood there, shaking. Then Webb groaned. Malachi looked at the trees. He looked at the path behind him, and he knew there was no road back. He picked up the knife. He did not remember the exact motion. Only the feeling of resistance. Then warmth on his hands. When it was over, he stood there breathing hard, staring at what he had done. He was 16 years old. He did not cry. He ran. He did not take food. He did not take water. He did not think about anything except putting distance between himself and the body on the path. He ran into the trees. The forest swallowed him quickly. The light changed. The ground grew softer. Branches scratched at his face and arms. He kept going. By nightfall, he reached the edge of the swamp. He did not know how long he walked. He only knew that when he finally stopped, his legs gave out under him and he lay in the mud, listening to strange wet sounds moving in the dark. He slept in short, broken pieces. When morning came, he was still alive. He stayed near the swamp for days, moving only when he had to. He drank from streams. He ate what he could find, roots, berries. Once a small animal he managed to stun with a rock. He did not build a fire. He thought about his mother. He did not let himself think about going back. On the third day, he heard dogs. At first, it was distant, a low, confused sound. Then it became clearer. They were not just looking. They were following. Malachi moved deeper into the swamp. He waded through water when he could, hoping to break his trail. He walked along fallen logs. He climbed and doubled back, but he could hear them. Always. By nightfall, he saw torchlight through the trees, men's voices. They were closer than he thought. He climbed into a thick stand of cypress and hid in the twisted roots. He pressed himself into the shadows and tried to make his breathing stop making sound. The dogs came near. He could hear them sniffing, whining, confused. A man said, "He's here somewhere." Another said, "We'll get him, they always get tired." Malachi stayed still until his muscles burned. Eventually the dogs were pulled away. The voices faded. He did not move for a long time. Over the next weeks he learned what it meant to be hunted. Sometimes the dogs came close. Sometimes the men did. Once he watched them pass so near he could see the mud on their boots. He learned the swamp, the places that would hold his weight and the places that would not. He learned where snakes slept. He learned where the water was deeper than it looked. He also learned something else. The men were not careful. They were loud. They talked. They believed he was already half caught. One night he saw a lone man on the edge of the trees, relieving himself, his rifle leaning against a stump. Malachi watched him for a long time. He did not plan anything. He only moved. The man never made a sound. Malachi took the rifle. He did not leave the body where it fell. He dragged it. The next day the hunters found their first missing man. They searched harder. They brought more dogs. They brought more men. But now Malachi was not only running, he was watching. He began to understand their patterns, their mistakes, their confidence. He did not yet think of himself as something to be feared. He only knew that when he closed his eyes he saw Eliza's face. And he knew he was not going back. One morning, as the mist lifted off the swamp, he climbed a tree to see farther than he ever had before. In the distance he saw movement, not just one group, several. They were spreading out, organizing. He also saw something else. A man he recognized from the plantation, pointing, speaking with certainty. They had his name now. Malachi climbed down slowly. His heart was beating very steadily. He knew this was no longer a search. It was a hunt. And as the first dogs' voices rose again from the trees, closer than ever, and he saw torchlight even though the sun was still in the sky, Malachi Briggs turned deeper into the swamp and realized that from this moment forward, he would either learn how to disappear completely, or learn how to make them afraid to follow. The dogs were closer than they had ever been before. Malachi did not run blindly this time. He stood knee-deep in dark water beneath the cypress trees and listened. The swamp breathed around him, slow and wet, full of quiet movements that were not his. Insects skimmed the surface of the water. Somewhere something large shifted and went still again. Then came the dogs. Their voices were not all the same. One was high and frantic, like it was always surprised by what it found. Another was lower, steadier, more certain. He could hear the handlers too, men trying to sound calm, failing. "They're close," one said. "They're always close," another answered. "Just keep them moving." Malachi lowered himself until only his nose and eyes were above the water. He held his breath and counted slowly, the way his mother used to when pain was coming and there was nothing else to do but wait. The first dog reached the edge of the pool he was in and stopped. It sniffed, whined, took a step forward. Malachi stayed still. The dog stepped into the water, then stopped again, confused by the smell that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Another dog bumped into it. The handler shouted, "Circle around." Malachi moved, not away, sideways, slowly. He slid through the water, using the thick roots of the trees as cover, keeping them between himself and the sounds. Henny reached a place where the ground rose slightly. He pulled himself up and crawled, belly to mud, until he was behind a fallen tree. He waited. The dogs came closer, then farther, then closer again. For a moment he thought they had lost him. Then one of the men shouted, "There!" He doubled back. Malachi did not think. He ran, not toward safety, there was no such place, but toward something he had noticed days earlier, a stretch of swamp where the ground was broken by deep, sucking pits of mud and tangled reeds. A place men avoided because horses could not go there and walking was slow and dangerous. He knew where to step, they did not. He reached the edge of it and did not slow down. He moved across it like a shadow, stepping on roots, logs, small islands of firmer ground. Behind him he heard a shout and then a scream as someone went down into the mud. The dogs hesitated. The men did not, that was their mistake. Malachi disappeared into the trees again, but this time he did not keep going. He climbed, he found a thick branch high enough to hold his weight and pulled himself up, then moved along it and dropped onto another tree. He stayed there, crouched, breathing through his nose, listening. They came into the broken ground carefully now. Too carefully. They were spread out. One of them, just one, moved ahead of the others, trying to be useful. Malachi waited until the man was directly beneath him. He dropped. The impact knocked the air out of both of them. The man tried to shout. Malachi's hand closed over his mouth. It was not quick, but it was quiet. When it was over, Malachi dragged the body a short distance and covered it with branches and mud. He took the man's knife. He took a small pouch of dried meat, then he vanished again. That night he did not go far. He stayed within hearing distance. He wanted to know what they would do. He watched their torches move through the trees like angry stars. He heard them argue. "He was here. You lost the trail. He killed Thomas." The name meant nothing to him, but the word "kill" did. They were no longer pretending this was a simple retrieval. They were afraid. The next day they brought more men. By the end of the week, there were enough of them that Malachi could hear voices no matter where he went. They moved in lines. They tried to push him in one direction. He learned to move ahead of them without being seen. He learned how long he could stay in one place before the swamp itself seemed to turn against him. He learned to sleep in trees, to eat little, to drink without making ripples. He also learned that fear made men careless. One afternoon he heard laughter. He followed it. 3 men were sitting on a fallen log, eating, their rifles leaning nearby. They were talking about him. "He's just a boy," one said. "Can't keep this up forever." Still another said, "I don't like this place. Feels like it's watching." Malachi waited until one of them stood and walked a short distance away to relieve himself. That one died first. The second tried to reach his rifle. He didn't make it. The third ran. Malachi did not chase him. He took the rifles. He took the food. That night, when the hunters realized 3 men were gone, the swamp seemed to close in on them. They started moving in larger groups. They started firing into the trees at shadows. They started shouting each other's names too often. Malachi stayed quiet. Days passed. Then one morning he found something new. A line of cloth tied between 2 trees. A marker. They were dividing the swamp. They were learning. That made something cold settle deeper in his chest. He knew he could not keep doing this the same way. He began to think differently. Not about escaping. About shaping where they went. He began to leave signs, not obvious ones. A broken branch here, a footprint there, a scrap of cloth. He led them into the worst parts of the SWA. He led them into places where sound did not carry and ground did not hold. Sometimes he did nothing but watch as they struggled. Sometimes he took one. Slowly the number of men began to change. They started with many. Now there were fewer, not enough fewer to stop, but enough to make them uneasy. One evening he followed a group until they made camp on a small rise of dry ground. They built a fire. They talked loudly. They drank. Malachi watched them until the fire burned low. Then he moved. He took 2 before anyone understood what was happening. The others fired wildly into the dark. He was already gone. The next morning 2 bodies were missing. They found them later, face down in the water. That was when the words began. Not just fugitive, not just runaway, something else. They started saying it quietly, as if the swamp itself might hear. "He's not human." Malachi did not know this, but he could feel the change. They were no longer hunting with confidence. They were hunting because they did not know how to stop. One night he climbed a tree and watched a new group arrive, better dressed, better armed, not plantation men, professionals. He heard one of the old ones say, "They're from up north, paid hunters." Malachi's hands tightened around the branch. This was growing. He knew then that running alone would not save him forever. He needed to become something they could not understand, something that belonged to the swamp more than they did. The next day he found a man separated from the others by a wide stretch of water. The man was older, careful. Malachi followed him for hours. When he finally moved, he did not kill him quickly. He knocked him down, took his gun, tied his hands. The man's eyes were wide. "Please," he said, "they'll pay you for me more than I'm worth dead." Malachi did not answer. He dragged the man to a tall bare tree near the edge of a clearing. The man began to cry. Malachi worked in silence. When he was done, he stepped back and looked at what he had made. The man hung there, not yet dead, his feet just off the ground, struggling. Malachi turned away before it was over. He disappeared into the trees. That evening, the hunters found him. They did not take him down right away. They stood and stared. No one spoke. Something had changed. This was no longer just about catching a runaway. This was something else now. And as Malachi watched from far away, hidden in the deepening shadows, he understood that the swamp was no longer just a place to hide. It was becoming a place where men learned fear. They did not cut him down until morning. The body hung through the night, turning slowly in the wet air, creaking as the tree moved. When daylight came, the men gathered around it like they were looking at something that had fallen out of a story and into their world by mistake. No one spoke at first. Then one of them said, "This ain't right." Another answered, "He's making a point." They took the body down and laid it on the ground. The man's face was swollen and dark. His eyes were still open. Someone crossed himself. By noon, word had already started moving. It did not move fast, the way news sometimes does when it is exciting. It moved slow and heavy, the way bad weather does, rolling from one place to another, darkening everything it touched. By the time the sun went down, the nearest towns had heard there was something wrong in the swamp. By the second day, the word hanging had been added. By the third, the word monster. The plantation owners did not like that word. It made things sound out of control. So they used another one, bounty. They met in a house with wide porches and clean floors and talked about losses, about money, about order. Someone said, "If we don't stop this, people will start thinking they can just vanish." Someone else said, "He's already got men scared to go in there." The number was decided quietly, then raised again, not because they thought Malachi was worth that much, but because fear is expensive. The next wave of men arrived with horses, better rifles, and faces that did not belong to the land. They did not talk much. They listened. Malachi watched them from the trees and felt the shape of the hunt change. These men moved differently. They did not shout. They did not wander. They marked places. They spoke in low voices. They tested the ground before they stepped. One of them found a place where Malachi had crossed water days earlier and said, "He's learning." Another answered, "So are we." Malachi moved deeper. He began to sleep in places no one would think to look. In the bent trunks of trees, on narrow shelves of dry ground surrounded by water. Once in the hollow of a fallen cypress that smelled like rotten insects. He stopped killing often. He started choosing. One night he followed two men who were arguing. "You're too slow," one said. "You're too loud," the other answered. They separated. Malachi took the louder one. The other never knew how close he had come. When they found the body, they did not panic. They studied it. One of the new men crouched and said, "He's watching us." Malachi did not know they said that. But he began to understand that fear was not only something that happened, it was something you could plant. He started leaving things where they would be found, a boot, a hat, a rifle, carefully placed against a tree. Once a man's coat folded neatly with nothing else nearby. The hunters began to talk less and listen more. They started checking behind themselves. They started sleeping in tighter circles. That made it harder, but not impossible. The swamp did not belong to them. One afternoon, Malachi found a place where the trees grew in a rough ring around a stretch of dry ground. The light there was strange, broken. He waited. A group of 4 men came through. They were careful. They were good. Malachi did not attack them. He followed them. All day, they never knew. At dusk, one of them lagged behind to fix his boot. Malachi took him and was gone before the others noticed the absence. They searched for him until dark. They found him hanging the next morning. That was the second tree. The number did not matter yet, but the idea did. Now it was not an accident, it was a pattern. The bounty doubled. Men came from farther away. Some of them came because of the money, some because they wanted to be the one. Malachi listened to them talk when he could. They told stories about him. Some said he was huge. Some said he moved like smoke. Some said he had killed more men than anyone could count. The truth was smaller, but growing. One night he followed a man who had followed him for most of the day without realizing it. The man was good. He read the ground. Well, Malachi only knew because he had made a mistake. He led the man into a place where the swamp narrowed and the trees grew close. He turned suddenly. They saw each other at the same time. The man raised his rifle. Malachi threw himself aside as the shot exploded and bark flew from the tree behind him. They ran, not away from each other, toward. They collided in the brush. The man was strong, so was Malachi. The fight was short and ugly. When it was over, Malachi sat in the mud, breathing hard, and looked at the man's face. He did not hang this one. He left him where he lay. That night he thought about how close it had been. He began to understand something else. This would not end. Not by hiding, not by running. They would keep coming. More men. Better men. The only way this ended was if the swamp itself became something no one wanted to enter. He began to plan in small, quiet ways. He learned where the trails converged. He learned where men liked to rest. He learned where sound carried farthest. And he began to imagine trees not as cover, but as signs. The third hanging happened near a narrow path that everyone used. They found it at dawn. The fourth was 2 days later. After that, the number started to move faster, not because Malachi was killing more, but because the hunters were making more mistakes. They went out in pairs, then in threes. They argued. They split up. Fear makes men lonely. The swamp took advantage. By the time the count reached 7, people in the nearest town were talking about staying away from the eastern woods. By 10, teamsters refused to take certain roads. By 12, someone wrote a notice warning travelers. Malachi did not see any of this, but he felt the change. The swamp felt different, quieter, as if it were listening too. One evening he climbed a tall pine near the edge of the woods and looked out toward open land. He could see smoke from houses, life going on, and he understood that his name was moving farther than his body ever had. That night he followed a group into a place where 3 paths met. He did not attack. He waited. 2 of them went one way, 3 another. 1 stayed behind. Malachi stepped out of the dark. The man saw him and reached for his gun. Malachi was already too close. This one struggled, cried, promised. Malachi worked in silence. He left the body where it would be found quickly. The next day he watched from far away as the men gathered around it. He saw how they stood back from the tree, how no one touched the rope at first. He saw one man look up into the branches as if expecting to see something looking back. That was when Malachi understood. He was no longer just being hunted. He was being waited for, and waiting was worse. That evening he heard something new, not dogs, not shouting. A horn, long and low, a signal. He climbed and watched. More men were coming. And with them something else, organization. He did not know the number that would one day be spoken in whispers. He only knew that the swamp had started to change men, and that he was going to help it continue. The first time Malachi heard his own name spoken by someone who had never seen him, he was crouched in the roots of a cypress, watching a new group of men enter the swamp. They came in from the north side, careful and quiet, with a confidence that came from not yet understanding where they were. One of them, a thin man with a narrow face, said, "They call him Malachi Briggs." Another answered, "They call him worse things than that." Malachi did not move. He listened. "He's left 13 hanging," the thin man said. "Some folks say more." "That's just stories," someone else said. "A man's a man." "Maybe," the first one answered, "but this one's been living out here like he was born to it." They moved on. Malachi stayed where he was until the sounds were gone. His name felt strange in his head, spoken by mouths he did not know. It felt heavier than it should have. Over the next weeks he heard it more, in different voices, with different shapes. Sometimes it was said like a curse, sometimes like a challenge, sometimes like a warning. He began to understand that he was no longer just a man moving through trees. He was becoming something that moved ahead of him. The swamp started to show him things, not in words, in patterns. He noticed that men avoided certain paths now, that they hesitated at certain clearings, that some of them refused to go past certain trees even when ordered. He noticed that fires were built closer together, that voices dropped at night. He also noticed something else. People were starting to come into the swamp who were not there to hunt him. One night he heard soft footsteps and nearly killed the man who made them before he saw the way he held his hands. The man was thin, with scars on his back that told their own story. "I ain't here for you," the man whispered. "I'm here because of you." They stared at each other. "Are in the dark," the man said. "They say you know how to make it through." Malachi did not answer. The man swallowed. "I got a sister, still back there." Malachi understood then. He did not speak, but he did not leave. The man took that as an answer. It was not the last. Over time others came, not many, just enough to change the shape of things. He did not lead them openly. That was too dangerous. But sometimes he would leave signs that only someone desperate would follow. A piece of cloth tied low. A branch broken in a way that did not look like accident. He began to see faces that reminded him of the quarters. He began to see fear that was not about him, and he began to feel something that was not quite hope and not quite anger. It made him careless once. Only once. He followed a trail that looked too clean, too easy. He realized it too late. The shot missed him, but it was close enough that he felt the wind of it. He vanished into the trees and did not stop until night. After that he was more careful. The hangings continued, but slower, more deliberate. He chose places where the trees stood alone, where the bodies would be seen, not hidden. The count was not something he kept track of, but others did. By the time the number reached the 20s, people stopped saying it out loud. They said so many instead, or too many. In one town, a preacher said it was a sign. No one agreed on what. The men hunting him were not all the same anymore. Some were there for the money. Some were there because they had lost someone. Some were there because they were afraid of what would happen if they were not. And then one day Malachi heard a voice he recognized. He froze where he stood. The voice was older now. Rougher, but he knew it. He climbed and watched. The man stood with two others near a narrow stretch of higher ground. He was pointing, talking, showing them something. Malachi's stomach tightened. It was Isaiah. Isaiah had been on the plantation, older than Malachi, strong, quiet. They had worked the same fields, shared water once. Isaiah had been sold 2 years before Malachi ran, or so Malachi had thought. Now he was here, wearing a coat, holding a rifle, pointing at the ground like he knew it. Malachi did not understand at first. Then he saw Isaiah bend and touch a broken branch, the kind Malachi used. Isaiah looked up and said something Malachi could not hear. The men nodded. They moved. Malachi moved too. But the shape of the day had changed. He stayed far back. He watched Isaiah lead them, not straight to him, but close, too close. That night Malachi did not sleep. He moved, he doubled back, he crossed water twice. He climbed and watched. By morning, he was sure. Isaiah was not guessing. He was reading, and he was good at it. Malachi remembered Isaiah's eyes, how he used to watch people, how he never spoke much. He remembered thinking once that Isaiah would survive anything. He had been right, but not in the way he expected. The next 2 days were the closest anyone had ever come. Once Malachi heard them talking less than 100 yards away. Once he saw Isaiah stop and listen and then change direction, toward him. On the third day Malachi made a decision. He would end it, not the hunt but the trail. He found a place where the swamp narrowed into a series of dry islands connected by shallow water. A place with only a few ways through. He waited. Isaiah came with 4 men. They moved carefully. Malachi let them. He took one from the back first, then vanished. The men shouted. They fired. Isaiah did not. Isaiah knelt by the body and looked at the ground. He stood, said something. They spread out. Malachi took another, then another. The 4th ran. Isaiah did not. Isaiah waited. Malachi circled. They saw each other at the same time. For a moment neither moved. Isaiah's face was tight. Mal, he said. The name hit harder than any bullet. You should have stayed gone, Isaiah said. Malachi did not answer. You can't keep this, Isaiah said. They'll never stop. Malachi said quietly, neither will I. Isaiah's mouth tightened. They moved. It was fast. Both of them knew how to fight. But Malachi had the swamp. Isaiah went down in the water coughing. Malachi stood over him. He did not kill him. He took his rifle. He said, don't follow me again. Isaiah lay there, breathing hard, looking up at him. I didn't want to, he said. Malachi left. That night he did not feel victory. He felt something like grief. 2 days later the trap was sprung. It began with silence. No dogs, no shouting, no careless movement, just absence. Malachi moved slowly, suspicious of every step. He felt it before he saw it, the wrong quiet. Then the first shot came from his left. He threw himself down as the ground beside him exploded into dirt. More shots, from the right, from behind. He ran straight into men he had not seen. They had waited. They had learned. They had used someone who knew him. He fought. He broke through. A bullet tore across his side, hot and sharp. He did not stop. He did not know how long he ran, only that when he finally fell, it was into a narrow cut of rock and earth half hidden by brush. He crawled, he bled, he dragged himself into darkness, and outside above him he heard men shouting that they had him. Malachi did not know how long he lay in the dark. At first there was only pain, not a sharp pain anymore, but a deep spreading heat that made his thoughts come apart into small useless pieces. He could hear his own breathing too loud in his ears. He pressed his hand to his side and felt wetness. He was bleeding more than he should. The narrow cut in the earth smelled of damp stone and old water. It was not a cave, not really, more like a long wound in the ground, half covered by roots and brush, just deep enough that a man could disappear into it if no one was looking too closely. Outside he heard voices. They went this way. He's hit. "Circle around, don't rush in." They were careful now. That scared him more than shouting ever had. He crawled deeper, using his elbows and knees, leaving a dark smear behind him that he did not look back at. The space narrowed until he had to turn his head sideways to breathe. He stopped because there was nowhere else to go. He lay there and listened, boots on leaves, men talking in low voices, a dog whining, then the sound of something heavy being dragged. "Block the far side. Watch the rocks. He can't have gone far." Malachi closed his eyes and tried to slow his breathing. He thought of his mother, not her face. The sound of her voice counting quietly when pain came. He counted. Outside something changed. The men were not moving randomly anymore. They were settling in, making a ring. He understood then that this was not another sweep. This was a waiting. The first night passed in pieces. He drifted in and out of dark, shallow sleep. Every time he woke, he expected to see a face in front of him. In the morning, he heard birds again. And men, they were still there. They had brought more, he could tell by the number, voices, by the way orders were being repeated. Someone said, "We've got him cornered. He's bleeding." Another answered, "Then he'll get tired." Malachi pressed his teeth together. He tore a strip from his shirt and tied it around his side as tightly as he could. It did not stop the bleeding completely, but it slowed it. He did not have water. He did not have food. He did not have a way out. On the second day, they tried to flush him. They sent a man into the cut from the far end. Malachi heard him coming long before he saw him. He waited. When the man crawled close enough, Malachi moved. It was short and terrible and silent. The body blocked part of the narrow spac. Malachi pushed it aside and crawled past it, deeper into the rock. He found a place where the cut turned sharply and went up a little, creating a pocket just large enough to crouch in. He stayed there. The men found the body. Their voices changed. "He's still in there, careful." They did not send another man. They waited again. The third day was worse. The pain in his side had become something dull and heavy. His mouth was dry. His thoughts felt slow. He dreamed of water. When he woke, he could hear someone coughing nearby. He thought, for a moment, that Isaiah had come back, but the voice was wrong. That night, rain came, not much, but enough. Water began to drip down through cracks in the earth. Malachi caught it in his hands and drank. It was not much, but it kept him alive. The fourth day, someone shouted, "He's got to be dead in there." Someone else answered, "Don't be stupid." They argued. That was good. It meant they were tired. It meant they were afraid of waiting. On the fifth day, Malachi did something he had never done before. He prayed, not for rescue, not for mercy, just for enough strength to move when he needed to. That night he heard something new, not voices, metal, the sound of tools striking stone. They were trying to widen the entrance, to come in after him. Panic rose in him, fast and hot. He forced it down. He moved. He crawled back the way he had come, slow and careful, dragging his bad side behind him. He reached the place where the cut met the open swamp again. He listened. The men were focused on the far end. He could hear the rhythm of work. He waited until it stopped. Then he moved. He did not run. He slid into the water and let it close over him. He stayed under as long as he could, then came up under a curtain of hanging plants. He stayed there until his chest burned. Then he moved again. He did not know where he was going. Only away. He moved through water and mud and brush until he could not hear them anymore. Then he kept going. He collapsed in a stand of young trees just before dawn. He woke when the sun was already high. He was alone. For a little while. He spent days moving slowly, hiding, sleeping in short stretches. He could not hunt. He could barely walk. He ate roots. He drank from streams. He kept his side bound. It began to itch. That worried him more than the pain. He saw men twice. Both times he stayed still until they passed. He understood now how close he had come to ending. He also understood something else. They had changed. They were not a mob anymore. They were an army, the largest hunt Texas had ever put together, even if no one would ever write it that way. They had patterns, signals, patience. He could not fight them the same way anymore. On the seventh day after his escape, he found a place where the swamp rose into a ridge of dry ground covered in thick brush. He crawled into it and slept for a long time. When he woke, someone was standing over him. He reached for his knife. The man held up his hands. "Easy," he whispered. It was the same thin man who had come weeks before, the one with the sister. "You shouldn't be here," Malachi said. "They're everywhere," the man answered. "But not here, not yet." He knelt, looked at the blood-stained cloth. "You're hurt bad." "I'll live," Malachi said. The man hesitated and said, "More people are coming. They're not just hunting you now, they're hunting the idea of you." Malachi closed his eyes for a moment. The man said, "Some folks got out because of you." Malachi did not answer. "I can bring you food," the man said. "Sometimes, not often." Malachi looked at him. "Don't come back here," he said. The man swallowed, nodded. He left. Malachi lay there and watched the light move through the leaves. He thought about the cut in the earth, about the ring of men. about how close he had been to dying in the dark like an animal. Some effing in him hardened. When he could walk again, he did not return to the old places. He went farther, deeper, where the swamp became a maze even to itself. He stopped thinking about survival. He started thinking about endings, not his, theirs. He began to prepare in ways he never had before. He made places. He learned how long it took for men to respond to a sound. He learned how to move wounded without leaving a trail. And when he was strong enough to kill again, he did not choose quickly. He chose carefully. The next man he took did not even know Malachi was there until the rope was already around his neck. Malachi did not watch him die. He moved on. The trees were beginning to learn their purpose, and the hunt was about to learn that it had not ended. Malachi did not return to the hunt returned to him, but when it did, it found a different thing waiting. The wound in his side closed slowly and badly. It left a tight, angry scar that pulled when he moved and burned when the weather changed. He took that as a reminder, not of weakness, of time, of how close he had come to being finished in a hole in the ground while men waited above him like patient insects. He did not let that happen again. He stopped thinking in days. He began to think in distances, in responses, in habits. He learned where groups always slowed down, where they always relaxed, where they always argued. He learned which men were sent ahead and which ones stayed back. He learned which voices belonged to leaders and which to men who only pretended they were not afraid. He built places, not shelters, stations, small hidden points where he could wait, watch, and vanish. Trees with notches only he would notice. Narrow strips of dry ground that looked like nothing unless you knew exactly how to step onto them. Paths through water that erased themselves behind him. He also began to mark, not randomly, with intent. The next body was found hanging from a lone oak at the edge of a narrow ridge. What made it different was not the hanging, it was what was on the man's chest. Malachi had cut a simple mark into the cloth of his shirt. A shape that did not mean anything, but looked like it should. They did not understand it. They talked about it anyway. The third man after that was left with the same mark. Then the fourth. The rumor began before the meaning. Some said it was a sign, some said it was a count, some said it was a warning. Malachi did not care what they thought it was. He only cared that they saw it. The hangings began to spread, not deeper into the swamp, outward, closer to paths, to roads, to places where men expected to be safe. This changed the tone. Men who had never intended to go into the eastern woods began to worry. Teamsters stopped traveling alone. 2 small towns organized, night watches. The hunters did not like this. It meant their work was being seen. It meant their failure was becoming public. They brought in more men. They brought in soldiers. They brought in someone new. Malachi first heard about him from voices carried over water. He's not like the others. He don't chase, he waits. He caught 3 men in Arkansas last year, all alive. Malachi listened. He did not change anything. Not yet. He watched how the new man moved. He watched how the others listened to him. He saw how patterns shifted around that quiet center. So he shifted too. He began to use time. He would take 1 man and then disappear for days. Let the swamp settle. Let them start to believe they had pushed him farther away. Then he would take 2 in one night from different places, and leave them both hanging by morning. With the mark, the count climbed. Not all at once, but steadily. Men began to talk about numbers the way people talk about storms. Not if, when. He stopped killing the careless. He killed the careful. He learned to feel the difference. One evening, he load a group that moved too well to be amateurs. He stayed with them until night. They set a quiet camp. No fire. No loud talk. Malachi waited until one of them moved just a little too far from the others to relieve himself. That one did not come back. The others noticed. They did not shout. They formed a circle. They waited. Malachi waited too. Hours passed. Finally, one of them said, "He wants us to move." They did not. At dawn, they found their man hanging from a tree just far enough away that he had been invisible in the dark. The mark was on his chest. After that, the professional hunters stopped joking. The soldiers stopped acting like this was training. They started checking trees before they checked ground. They started looking up. That pleased Malachi more than anything else, because it meant he had changed the way they saw the world. The man who did not chase began to get closer. Malachi felt it before he saw it. Traps that were not meant to be obvious. Movements that were not meant to scare him. Waiting. Once Malachi followed a trail he was sure was real, only to realize too late that it curved gently back toward itself. He froze. He stayed still for a very long time. He heard nothing. That was the point. He moved away without leaving a sign. That night he did not kill anyone. The next night he did, too, from a group that thought it had learned something. He did not leave the mark. That was a message too. The count passed 30. No one said the number out loud. They said since the last one or before the other two. In one town, a shopkeeper nailed his windows shut and left. In another, a preacher said the woods were cursed. Men laughed at him. Quietly, they did not go into the woods. The man who did not chase finally spoke where Malachi could hear him. "You're tired," the man said to no one. "You're wounded. You're angry. But you're also careful, and careful men make mistakes." Malachi did not know why he said it. Maybe the man was talking to himself. Maybe he was talking to the swamp. Malachi moved that night like smoke. He found a group of 5. He took 3. He left 2 alive on purpose. He wanted stories to walk. The survivors did not sleep much after that. They said he moved through trees without sound. They said he touched one man, and another died. They said he was not alone anymore. Malachi heard this later. It did not matter. What mattered was that the trees were beginning to be chosen. He did not use any tree. He chose ones that could be seen from far away, on ridges, near crossings. Once, near the edge of a field. That one caused shouting. Soldiers came. They took the body down quickly. But it had already been seen. The mark was still there, painted this time, with something dark. The man who did not chase changed tactics. He began to move at night. He began to stop trying to corner Malachi. He began to try to predict him. They crossed paths without seeing each other twice. Malachi felt it both times, like a pressure in the air. He knew then that this was no longer about numbers. It was becoming a conversation. One night Malachi found a small camp that had been abandoned in a hurry. No bodies, no blood. Just a fire half buried and tracks going in too many directions. He smiled, a little. He took one of the coats left behind and cut the mark into it. Then he hung it from a tree, a warning without a corpse. The next day he watched men argue beneath it. The count reached 40. Someone finally said it out loud, and then stopped. They brought more soldiers. They brought more dogs. They brought more ropes. Malachi did not speed up. He slowed down. He began to choose men who mattered, leaders, trackers, men who others listened to. Those hangings caused silence, then confusion, then anger. The man who did not chase lost 2 men in 1 week. He did not show it, but his movements changed. He eager to stay closer to his groups. Malachi took note. He did not try to take him. Not yet. The 47th man died near a place where 3 paths met. Malachi did not use the mark. He used the rope. He watched from far away as the body was found. He listened to the shouting. He counted the men. He noticed who gave orders. The 48th man was taken 3 nights later. He was not special. He was just the one who walked a little too far from the others. Malachi worked quickly. He hung him where he could be seen from the path. He cut the mark into the tree itself this time. Then he left. When the body was found, the swamp went quiet, not with peace, with waiting. Malachi watched from deep cover as men gathered. He heard someone say the number. He heard someone else say it has to end. He felt something in his chest that was not triumph, not relief, just a deep, settled certainty. This was no longer a chase, it was a narrowing. And somewhere in the woods the man who did not chase was also waiting. The swamp did not feel the same anymore. It felt smaller, not because the land had changed, but because the ways through it had. Too many men had walked them. Too many eyes had learned where to look. Too many silences had been broken. Malachi felt the narrowing like a hand closing. He also felt the other mind in the woods. Not a presence exactly, a pressure. The man who did not chase had a name, but Malachi did not know it. He only knew the shape of how the man thought. He could see it in the way traps were placed where they would not be found by accident. In the way groups were positioned to look careless while actually watching each other. In the way certain paths were left open like invitations that did not quite feel right. They were learning each other without meeting. Malachi began to leave fewer signs. The other man began to react to fewer things. They were circling. One morning Malachi found a place where someone had waited for him, not hidden, just patient. The ground was too clean, the brush too carefully bent. Malachi backed away without touching anything. That night he did not move. He stayed in a tree and listened. Nothing happened. That was worse. 2 days later he found a small pile of ashes arranged in a careful circle. No fire. Just the remains. In the center someone had placed a piece of rope. Not a noose. Just the rope. Malachi stared at it for a long time. Then he left. The next hanging did not happen. Not because Malachi could not do it. Because he chose not to. He wanted to see what the other man would do with silence. The answer came in the form of absence. 3 groups withdrew from places they had been watching for weeks. The woods shifted. New patterns formed. Malachi almost smiled. He began to follow the edges of those changes, not the men, the spaces between them. Once he saw a figure moving where no one should have been. He froze. The figure froze too. They were too far to see faces, too close to pretend. They stood there for a long moment, separated by water and reeds and quiet. Then the other man raised one hand, not in greeting, in acknowledgement. Then he stepped back and was gone. Malachi did not move for a long time. He understood now. This was no longer about capture. It was about understanding and ending. The other man left a message 2 nights later, not in blood, in placement. Malachi found one of his old stations, the hidden place he had built months ago. It had been disturbed, not ruined, not used, just visited. A single footprint remained in the center, pointed toward the north. Malachi did not follow it. He went south. He took a man that night, not for the count, for the reply. He hung the body in a place that had no tactical value at all, just visibility. He did not leave the mark. He left the rope cut cleanly in 2. The body fell the next morning. They both knew what that meant. After that, things moved faster, not in numbers, in closeness. They began to come within sight of each other without knowing it. Once Malachi watched a camp from a ridge and realized too late that someone was watching him from the opposite side. He slid back without being seen, but he knew. The other man began to predict where Malachi would not be. Malachi began to move there. They were both right. The woods became full of half-steps and near misses. Then came the night of the rain. It came hard and sudden, drowning sound and smell and shape. Malachi moved because he knew they would. He followed a narrow, rising strip of ground that cut through a low part of the swamp. Halfway across, he felt it, not a sound. A wrongness. He stopped. The shot came from his right. He was already moving. He fell into the water as the bullet tore through the place where he had been. More shots. From the other side. They had let him come. He swam under, came up behind a fallen tree and ran, not away, sideways. He heard shouting, then a voice that did not shout, "Don't chase!" That voice again, the one that did not hurry. Malachi changed direction. He climbed. He waited. He moved like he was being watched. Because he was. They did not try to close the trap. They followed, slowly, patiently. He lost them, or thought he did. 3 days later, he found a camp that should not have been there. Too well placed, too quiet. He did not go near it. He went around and found something waiting for him, a shallow pit, carefully covered. He stopped with 1 foot in the air. He backed away. He laughed once, quietly, out of something like respect. He changed the shape of his movement again. He began to act as if he were wounded, slow, careless. He left signs, too many signs. He let them see him from far away once, just a shape, just a shadow. They followed. He led them into a place where the ground looked solid and was not. 3 men went down into mud before they understood. 2 got out, 1 did not. Malachi did not kill any of them. He watched from a tree as they struggled. The voice that did not shout gave orders, calm, precise, efficient. They left. Malachi understood then. The other man was not trying to win by force. He was trying to win by not losing. He was waiting for Malachi to make the first real mistake. So Malachi made a different kind of move. He went back, not toward the deepest swamp, toward the edge, toward places that were no longer watched because everyone assumed he would not go there. He moved in daylight. He moved where there were almost people. He took a man from a group of soldiers near a road and vanished. He did not hang him. He left him in the open, alive, tied. The message was clear. I can be anywhere. That night, the woods filled with movement, too much. Malachi went still. He climbed and stayed there for a day and a night. On the second night, he saw a single figure walking alone along a narrow ridge. No escort, no noise, just walking. Malachi followed. The man stopped in a place where 3 trees leaned together like a broken gate. He said without turning, "You're closer than you think." Malachi did not move. The man said, "I know why you choose trees. I know why you leave space. I know why you don't always kill." Malachi stepped out. They faced each other across 10 paces of leaf and shadow. The man was not big, not small, just balanced. "I'm not here to talk you in," the man said, "and I'm not here to rush you." Malachi said nothing. "I'm here because this can't keep going," the man said. "Not like this." "Why?" Malachi asked. "Because it ends with you dead," the man answered. "Or with a lot more dead before that." Malachi looked at him. "Both are already true," he said. The man nodded once. "That's why this is the last stretch," he said. They stood there for a long time. Then the man stepped back into the trees and was gone. Malachi did not follow. He knew where this was going now. The woods were too small for both of them, and only one of them would decide how it ended. After that night, the swamp held its breath. Not in silence. There were always insects, always water, always something moving. But in the way a room feels when 2 people are waiting for the same door to open. Malachi did not kill again. Not because he could not. Because he did not need to. The shape of things had already narrowed to a single path, even if no one could see it yet. He moved less. He stayed in fewer places longer. He began to feel where the other man was not, by where the woods felt too empty. Once he found a place where birds had gone quiet for no reason. He turned away. Once he found a path where the ground was too clean. He did not step on it. The man who did not chase was doing the same. They were removing the world from between them. 3 days passed, then 4. The soldiers and hunters waited and argued and moved and waited again. They no longer understood the shape of their own hunt. They were only holding the edges of something they could not see. On the 5th day, Malachi went back to the cut in the earth where he had nearly died, not into it, near it. He wanted to see it. The place looked smaller than it had in memory. He stood there for a long time, touching the scar on his side through his shirt. He did not know why he had come. Then he felt it, the other mind, not close, but aligned. They were moving toward the same center. That night, Malachi climbed a ridge of dry ground that rose like an island from the swamp. From there he could see far, water shining in broken pieces, dark lines of trees, a pale strip of road in the distance. He stayed there until dawn. Just before the light fully came, he saw movement, one man, walking alone, not trying to hide, not trying to be seen, just walking. Malachi waited. He did not follow. He let the man pass out of sight. Then he moved in a wide circle and came around ahead. He chose a place where 3 old trees stood close together, and the ground dipped gently between them. A place where sound carried oddly and distance lied. He waited there. He did not wait long. The man came out of the trees and stopped. He did not look surprised. He said, "You always pick places where the land makes decisions." Malachi said nothing. The man took off his hat and hung it on a low branch. Then he stepped into the open. "My name doesn't matter," he said, "but if you want one, it's Samuel." Malachi did not answer. Samuel looked at the trees, at the ground, at Malachi. "You're not going to run," Samuel said. "No," Malachi said. Samuel nodded. "Neither am I." They stood there, 2 men in a place that had eaten many others. "You could have killed me before I got here," Samuel said. "Yes," Malachi said. "Why didn't you?" Malachi thought about it. "Because then you wouldn't be here," he said. Samuel almost smiled. "That's fair." They circled each other slowly, not like fighters, like men walking around something fragile. "You know how this ends," Samuel said. "Do you?" Malachi asked. Samuel's eyes stayed on him. "It ends with one of us not walking away." Malachi said, "Or neither." Samuel considered that. "Yes," he said, "or neither." They stopped. The swamp seemed to lean in. Samuel said, "They'll keep coming if you die." Malachi said, "They'll keep coming if I live." "Yes," Samuel said, "but differently." Malachi did not answer. "People are already leaving because of you," Samuel said. "That doesn't stop because you win today." Malachi said, "This isn't about winning." Samuel looked at him for a long time. "No," he said, "it's about deciding." They stood there until the light changed. Then Samuel moved, not fast, not slow, just enough. Malachi moved too. The first shot went wide. The second cut bark from a tree. Malachi dropped and rolled and came up behind one of the trunks. Samuel did not rush. He did not chase. He waited. They moved through the trees like echoes. Each step was chosen. Each pause meant something. Malachi felt the old scar pull and burn. He ignored it. He changed direction suddenly and came out behind Samuel. Samuel was already turning. They fired at the same time. Malachi felt something tear through his shoulder. Samuel's hat flew off. They both went down. They both got up. They were closer now, too close for careful. Samuel said, "You're bleeding." "So are you," Malachi said. Samuel looked down. There was blood on his sleeve. They moved again. This time Malachi did not try to disappear. He went straight in. They collided. The rifles went away. Hands and weight and breath and mud. They fought without words. Samuel was strong, so was Malachi. They broke apart. Samuel drew a knife. Malachi already had his. They stood, breathing hard, 10 feet apart. "This is the part no one tells stories about," Samuel said. Malachi said nothing. They closed. Steel flashed. Malachi felt a hot line open across his arm. Samuel felt something hit his side. They circled again, closer, closer. Then Samuel slipped. Just a little. Malachi moved without thinking. He drove forward. Samuel's knife went wide. Malachi felt the resistance. Then it was over. Samuel stood very still. He looked down, then up. He said, "You were always going to be the one who decided." Then he sat down. Malachi stood there, shaking. He did not know how long. When he looked again, Samuel was not moving. The swamp did not react. It just kept being itself. Malachi cleaned his knife. Slowly, he sat down against a tree. He waited for pain. It came. He waited for voices. They did not come. He stayed there until the sun was high. Then he stood and walked. Not into the deep swamp, not toward the road, sideways, away from the place where the world was narrowing. They found Samuel's body 2 days later. They did not find Malachi. They searched, they argued, they waited, they searched again. They found no tracks, they found no blood, they found no signs. The soldiers left first, then the paid hunters, Then the rest, some said Malachi had died too and the swamp had taken him. Some said he was wounded and crawled away to die where no one would ever see him. Some said he walked south. Some said west. Some said he never left the woods at all. The trees kept their own counsel. Years later, men would still talk about the hangings, about the number, about how the woods had once learned fear and taught it back. They would argue about the ending. There was no agreement, only the swamp, and the paths that no one used anymore. And somewhere, perhaps, a man with a scar in his side and another in his shoulder, walking where no one thought to look, or perhaps not, no one ever wrote it down.